December 7th, 1941. In 90 minutes, a sleeping nation was shattered. The pride of the U.S. Pacific Fleet burned in its own harbor. Japan believed it had crippled America before the war truly began. But the attack did not cripple a nation. It created a resolve that would not bend. This is not only the story of an ambush, it is the story of what happened next. How farmers and factory workers forged the largest war machine on Earth and drove it across the Pacific. The news moved like a shockwave from Honolulu to New York, from the Great Plains to the California coast. Two emotions bound the nation: grief and a desire to strike back. In Washington, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt prepared words that would become a vow. The date of December 7th would live in infamy, and the United States would respond. But the fleet at Pearl lay wounded. Carriers were at sea and spared, but battleships smoked in the harbor. How could America answer so quickly? With an idea, audacious, dangerous, almost impossible, and with a transformation that would remake the country. At 7:55 a.m., a quiet Hawaiian morning cracked open. Japanese carrier groups launched 353 aircraft in 2 waves: fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes. They swooped into Oahu, torpedoes knifing through water toward hulls, bombs whistling onto decks. Battleship Row turned into a cauldron. A 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb punched through the USS Arizona's deck. Her forward magazine detonated. In an instant, steel curled like paper, and a fireball roared upward. The ship became a tomb for 1,177 sailors and Marines. The USS Oklahoma rolled over after multiple torpedo hits, trapping men in darkness as water rose around them. Flames, smoke, sirens, men leaping into oil-slick water. Anti-aircraft guns spat back. Medics dragged the wounded through heat and shrapnel. Across the base, airfields burned. Rows of parked aircraft, wings touching, were slashed by strafing fighters. Kaneohe, Wheeler Hickam. Pilots sprinted for cockpits under fire. A few got airborne, fighting into a sky filled with zeros. The chaos lasted less than 2 hours, but the toll was searing. 2,403 Americans killed, 1,178 wounded. 8 battleships sunk or damaged. Cruisers, destroyers, auxiliaries struck. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed or wrecked. It was meant to break American will. It did the opposite. In Washington, the president's jaw set. The cabinet and Congress braced. The nation listened as FDR called December 7th, a date which will live in infamy, and asked for a declaration of war. The vote in the House included a single dissent. The Senate was unanimous. Isolation, already fraying, collapsed overnight. Enlistment offices flooded. Men lined sidewalks in coats and work shirts. Women looked to factories, hospitals, and the services. Families pinned blue stars in windows. The country that had kept one eye on Europe and one on its own, troubles now stared straight at the Pacific. New leaders stepped forward. Admiral Chester Nimitz took command of the battered Pacific Fleet before Christmas. Calm, precise, he studied the charted reefs and vast distances of an ocean at war. General Douglas MacArthur faced disaster in the Philippines and vowed to return. Carrier captains groomed air groups for a kind of fight battleships could not win. American resolve hardened into action. The attack had wounded more than one ship. It wounded assumptions. It made the Pacific everyone's business. The first question was simple and enormous: how to fight back. Before America could strike, it had to build. The change began with words, arsenal of democracy, then became blueprints, purchase orders, shift whistles, rivet guns. Assembly lines that once turned out sedans pivoted to turn out tanks, trucks, and bombers. The Ford Willow Run plant was designed to build B-24 Liberators at a pace that sounded impossible. At its peak, A bomber rolled off the line roughly every hour. Across the country, shipyards that once crafted yachts or cargo ships now birthed destroyers, carriers, and liberty ships. Welding arcs lit the night. Launchways groaned under new hulls. Henry Kaiser's yards smashed records, launching cargo ships in weeks and then days. Steel mills, aluminum smelters, and rubber plants roared. The government rationed gasoline, sugar, and tires. Victory gardens sprouted in backyards and vacant lots. War bonds hung in barbershops and drugstores. Children collected scrap metal. Freight trains thundered with crates marked for distant islands most Americans had never heard of. The economy became a single machine built around victory. The military swelled from a peacetime force into a continental army and a global navy. The Selective Training and Service Act had already begun the draft. After Pearl Harbor, the flow became a flood. Hundreds of camps trained recruits who arrived as civilians and left as infantrymen, artillery crews, sailors, aviators, and Seabees. Drill instructors hammered discipline into tired limbs. Rifle ranges cracked. Motor pools filled. Air training fields spread across flatlands, where cadets learned to bank, climb, and land under the watchful eyes of instructors who had flown mail routes a few years earlier. Society transformed alongside the factories. Women walked through the gates of plants wearing bandanas and coveralls. Rosie the Riveter was a poster, but she was also a million real women hauling rivet guns, wiring fuselages, and running cranes. African Americans left the Jim Crow South in larger numbers, seeking work in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area. The Double V campaign, Victory Abroad and at Home, took root. The war pressed the nation to look inward, even as it fought outward, exposing inequities and planting seeds for change. The government also made grave errors. Executive Order 9066 forced over 100,000 Japanese Americans from their homes to harsh inland camps. Many volunteered from those camps to serve in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in Europe, proving loyalty with sacrifice. The injustice would be acknowledged decades later, but at the time, it left scars. This colossal mobilization was costly and imperfect, but it was fast. By 1942 and 1943, the newly forged arsenal began to arrive at the front. Carriers, destroyers, submarines, bombers, landing craft. The giant had fists now. It was time to swing. The plan sounded reckless. Load Army medium bombers onto a Navy carrier. Steam them within range of the Japanese home islands. Launch the bombers from a short deck into uncertain winds. Drop bombs on military and industrial targets, then continue to China and pray there was fuel enough to crash land or bail out. It was a one-way ticket disguised as a mission. Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Doolittle, aviator and engineer, took the helm. Ground crews stripped B-25s of unnecessary weight and added fuel tanks. Crews trained for short takeoffs. The carrier selected, USS Hornet, left San Francisco with her deck crowded by twin-engine bombers. Sailors stared, grinned, shook their heads. The task force steamed west to a rendezvous with fate. On April 18, 1942, after an early detection by Japanese picket boats, the decision was made to launch hundreds of miles farther out than planned. Pilots tightened harnesses, propellers bit into cold air, and bombers lurched forward, wheels bouncing on pitching deck planks. One by one, 16 B-25s clawed into the sky. They flew low over the waves, then climbed and crossed the coastline into Japan. Sirens wailed in cities that had believed themselves out of reach. The physical damage was light. The psychological effect was heavy. For the first time, bombs fell on Tokyo and other cities. The message was simple: you are not safe. We can reach you. The crews pressed on toward China. Many crash-landed. Some bailed out in darkness. Chinese civilians and guerrillas helped shepherd survivors to safety at great cost. Several raiders were captured by the Japanese and suffered harsh imprisonment. Doolittle believed he would be court-martialed for losing his planes. Instead, he received the Medal of Honor. The raid lifted American spirits and jolted Japanese leaders. It helped set in motion decisions that would lead to a far greater clash. Intelligence, patience, and timing can break a superior force. American cryptanalysts at Station Hypo, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had chipped away at the Japanese Navy's JN-25 code. They suspected that a target identified as AF was Midway Atoll. To confirm, they had Midway send an unencrypted message about a water shortage. Japanese intercepts repeated it in code. AF was Midway. Admiral Chester Nimitz weighed his limited assets: 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, Yorktown, and a small force of cruisers and destroyers. Yorktown limped into Pearl Harbor, damaged from the Coral Sea battle, but repair crews swarmed her and returned her to sea in days. Nimitz set an ambush northwest of Midway. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, led a vast armada to seize the atoll and draw out what he believed remained of the American fleet. On June 4, 1942, Japanese planes struck Midway's airfields at dawn. American Marines and sailors fought fires and returned anti-aircraft fire, while Midway-based bombers launched desperate attacks. Torpedo squadrons from the carriers, flying slow, vulnerable TBD devastators, found the Japanese carriers and attacked at sea level into a storm of fighters and flak. They were shot down almost to the last plane. Their courage, however, fixed the enemy's attention at wavetop height. High above, Enterprise and Yorktown's dive bombers searched an empty sea until a fateful decision by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, following a lone Japanese destroyer's wake, revealed the fleet. It was the hinge of the battle. Around 10:20 a.m., the dive bombers rolled into their dives. On the Japanese decks below, crews were refueling and rearming aircraft for another strike. Bombs slammed into Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu. Fire leaped across decks, fed by aviation fuel and ordnance. Later that afternoon, Hiryu, the remaining Japanese carrier, launched counterstrikes that damaged Yorktown, but was found and destroyed in turn. By the end, 4 frontline Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, were gone, along with many veteran aviators. The U.S. lost Yorktown and many brave airmen and sailors, but the strategic balance shifted. Midway did more than avenge Pearl Harbor. It reduced Japan's ability to project power and handed the initiative to the United States. From that moment, the Japanese Navy mostly reacted while the U.S. Navy pressed forward. Midway did not end the war. It opened a door. Through that door lay a chain of islands, jungles, lagoons, ridges, coral reefs, and airstrips, each with a name that would become a test of endurance. Guadalcanal came first. In August 1942, Marines landed to seize an airfield under construction. The campaign turned into a 6-month struggle of night surface actions, air duels, ambushes in jungle heat, malaria, mud, and hunger. The sea around the island earned a grim nickname, Iron Bottom Sound. When it ended in early 1943, the United States held the island and the initiative. Tarawa followed in November 1943. The atoll was tiny, its defenses dense, its tides treacherous. Many landing craft grounded on reefs under machine gun fire. Marines waded hundreds of yards in chest-deep water. The battle lasted 76 hours and cost over 1,000 American dead. It shocked a nation that saw, in photographs and newsreels, the price of crossing a coral reef against a dug-in enemy. Kwajalein and Eniwetok in the Marshalls, then the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. These islands mattered because they could host airfields for the new B-29 superfortress, a bomber designed to fly far, high, and heavy. On Saipan, civilians died in tragic numbers, some leaping from cliffs in despair. The U.S. Navy fought the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American pilots and anti-aircraft gunners destroyed waves of Japanese aircraft. Tinian later launched the most consequential flights in history. Iwo Jima rose from the ocean as black volcanic rock. In February 1945, Marines stormed beaches under interlocking fire from concealed positions. The island did not bristle with bunkers so much as it breathed them. Tunnels, caves, hardened positions, all linked. The battle raged for more than a month. On Mount Suribachi, Marines raised a flag, captured in a photograph that would become emblematic of sacrifice and hope. The cost was staggering, nearly 26,000 American casualties, including almost 7,000 killed. Iwo's airfields later saved thousands of damaged B-29s limping home. Okinawa was the last and bloodiest stepping stone. Beginning in April 1945, the U.S. 10th Army fought for nearly 3 months against formidable defenses, while the fleet endured mass kamikaze attacks. The sky filled with smoke and tracers as pilots dove their aircraft into ships. More than 30 American ships were sunk. On land, artillery churned ridgelines into mud and rubble. Civilian suffering was immense. By June, Okinawa fell, but its lesson was brutal. An invasion of the Japanese home islands would be catastrophic for both sides. As the island campaign neared Japan, the air war changed. General Curtis LeMay, commanding 21st Bomber Command, faced poor accuracy at high altitude against small dispersed factories. He changed tactics: strip weight from B-29s, load them with incendiaries, fly at night, low, in tight streams. The goal: ignite cities built of wood and paper. On the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, B-29s crossed Tokyo low and fast, laying patterns of fire. The flames joined into a single roaring storm that devoured neighborhoods and suffocated shelters. More than 100,000 people died in one night. The raids continued, city after city. 67 urban areas burned or were heavily damaged. Railways, workshops, and depots were wrecked. The scale of destruction was unimaginable, and still, Japan did not surrender. Meanwhile, naval blockades strangled imports, submarines sank merchant ships, factories lacked materials, fuel dwindled. Yet the military government held on, hoping for better surrender terms or a mediated peace. The United States faced a grim calculus. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Kyushu and Honshu, projected appalling casualties. The European War ended in May 1945. Attention focused entirely on the Pacific. A different weapon, built in the desert and tested in secrecy, waited for a decision. For years, scientists and engineers had toiled under the Manhattan Project. Laboratories in Los Alamos, reactors at Hanford, and plants at Oak Ridge formed a hidden industrial network. The goal: harness the energy within the atom for a single, decisive blow. President Harry S. Truman, newly elevated after Roosevelt's death in April, received briefings that outlined the weapon's power and the potential to end the war without an invasion. The Allies sent the Potsdam Declaration, calling for Japan's unconditional surrender and warning of prompt and utter destruction if it refused. The Japanese government hesitated, divided, seeking a way to protect the emperor and avoid national humiliation. Truman weighed estimates of casualties, the pace of the firebombing, the blockade, and the potential entry of the Soviet Union into the war against Japan. He authorized use of the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian with a single bomb nicknamed Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m. over Hiroshima, The weapon detonated with the force of many thousands of tons of TNT. A city vanished into a blistering flash, a shockwave, and a towering cloud. Tens of thousands died instantly. Many more suffered burns and radiation sickness. Hospitals collapsed. Water boiled in canals. Survivors fled through streets turned to fire. Japan still did not surrender. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb, Fat Man, fell on Nagasaki. Mountains fractured the blast, but destruction was wider than any conventional raid. The same day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, routing Japanese armies there. Facing a two-front collapse and devastation at home, Emperor Hirohito intervened. He recorded a message to his people, citing a new and most cruel bomb and the need to end the suffering. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender. On September 2nd, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the instruments of surrender were signed. World War II ended. The path from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay was paved with ingenuity, courage, and terrible cost. America's arsenal had done more than mass-produce machines. It had produced a strategy, carriers and code breakers at Midway, Marines and soldiers on beaches and ridges, submariners hunting commerce, engineers pushing metallurgy, radar, rocketry, and nuclear physics forward. It had also produced hard moral questions that would echo for generations: the firebombing of cities, the internment of citizens, the use of atomic weapons. The war remade the United States. Women who had worked factory floors sought to keep their economic footing. African American veterans returned determined to claim rights they had fought to defend. The GY Bill opened colleges to millions and mortgages to new families. Suburbs sprang up. The economy boomed, anchored by technologies born in wartime labs. America emerged not only victorious, but permanently transformed into a global power, with responsibilities and entanglements across oceans. Alliances formed. A rival superpower rose. A new era began, shadowed by the atom's glare. Behind every factory statistic was a face. A machinist working double shifts at a press that stamped aluminum ribs for aircraft wings. A welder joining plates on a destroyer escort. A nurse at a field hospital on Saipan, stitching a wound in sweltering heat. A code breaker staring at ciphers in a windowless room. A torpedo pilot pressing home an attack against impossible odds. A CB bulldozing coral to carve a runway out of jungle. A mother rationing sugar while writing letters across the world. A father listening to the radio with his hands clasped tight. The war was national, but it was also deeply personal. The Pacific was a test of endurance. Each island was not simply a map point. It was a place where rain soaked uniforms for weeks, where coral cut skin to infection, where night patrols froze at the snap of a twig, where artillery's concussion rattled bone. Enemy soldiers defended to the last, convinced surrender was a shame worse than death. American troops learned to fight through caves, pillboxes, and ridgelines with flamethrowers, satchel charges, and grenades. Civilians were caught in the middle and suffered dreadfully. The photographs from Iwo Jima and Okinawa are not just history. They are warnings about what modern war does to bodies and hearts. Pearl Harbor unlocked a collective will. The United States had industry, resources, and manpower, but those alone do not guarantee victory. The difference came from an ability to learn and adapt. After early defeats, commanders studied, changed tactics, and made hard choices. Carriers replaced battleships at the center of naval power. Radar and radio discipline improved. Logistics, the dull art of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, became a decisive weapon. The country adjusted to reality and moved faster than a rigid empire could. The war could have bent a different way many times. Dive bombers finding Japanese carriers at Midway, Marines holding Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, the first wave at Tarawa breaking the seawall under fire, destroyers at Okinawa standing as shields against kamikazes, engineers at Los Alamos solving the unsolvable. Each moment seemed small against the vast Pacific, yet together they pulled a nation from shock to victory. Victory carried consequences that outlived the celebrations. Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended one war, but began another struggle. How to live in a world where a single weapon could erase a city. The firebombing of Tokyo asked how far democracies will go in total war. The internment of Japanese Americans revealed how fear can corrode justice. These questions remain, and they should. A nation must look back with clear eyes if it hopes to move forward with wisdom. Pearl Harbor was meant to be a knockout blow. Instead, it awoke a fury that reshaped the world. From burning oil in Hawaii to surrender in Tokyo Bay, America remade itself through shipyards, airfields, classrooms, and battlefields, paid for in youth, in blood, and in ash. When you strike a sleeping giant, you must be ready for the moment it opens its eyes. That generation did more than open theirs. They built, fought, and endured until the war was done. Their legacy is a map of choices, bold, flawed, brilliant, terrible, made under pressure. It reminds us that resolve without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without resolve is hollow. The line from Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima is one of history's swiftest and most brutal transformations. It forces us to ask what kind of power we create when we are wounded, and what kind of world we build after victory. Which part of this story strikes you most? Midway's 5 fateful minutes, the firestorm that erased a city in one night, or the decision to use a weapon that could unmake the world? Reflect on the costs paid for peace and the responsibilities that come with strength. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more historical turning points every week.